This is Atomic Biscuits, and I'm your host, BACFA. Hey there, friends from around the world. This is another episode of Atomic Biscuits, 202-409-22, Wars and Rumors. We're going to start over at semaphore.com, who apparently had an inside track, like so many did, about this Ryan Ruth character. It says here, in 2023 interview, alleged Trump plotter decried hurdles to get foreign soldiers for Kiev. When Ryan Ruth spoke to Semaphore on March 3rd, 2023, he was frustrated with the Ukrainian government, for which he'd traveled around the world to support. The Ukrainians, he complained, were being too rigid about admitting foreign soldiers of dubious qualifications, including a group of Afghan commandos who were facing skepticism and bureaucratic roadblocks in Kiev. Ukraine is very often hard to work with. Many foreign soldiers leave after a week in Ukraine or must move from unit to unit to find a place they are respected and appreciated, he told Semaphore. He'd been yelled at every time he suggested they tap Afghan commandos. They're afraid that anybody and everybody is a Russian spy, he said with frustration. Now, this man, widely reported to be Ruth, 58, is in custody for what the FBI described as an apparent attempt to assassinate President Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. When Semaphore talked to him, Ruth was one of a wave of American volunteers in Ukraine, the self-appointed director of a group he'd started called the International Volunteer Center. He was even by the standards of that frantic moment, a bit over the top. A Ukrainian involved in the effort told us at the time. But he was also, they said, authentically involved in the efforts to bring in foreign troops, and we quoted him in a story about the Afghan fighters. On X, he frantically tweeted at President Vladimir Zelensky with his ideas, for instance, to use Independence Park to create a tent city of all the foreigners here in support to get thousands more foreign civilians to come and support Ukraine. Zelensky did not appear to respond. Ruth appears at 2 minutes and 50 seconds in this Semaphore video, and there's a link here. Palm Beach County Sheriff Rick Bradshaw said Ruth's AK-47 style weapon with a scope had been recovered at the scene, according to the Associated Press. Ruth was not the focus of the 2023 story we wrote, but we spoke with him for less than half an hour. He said he'd spent 5 months in Ukraine working on his center, and when we spoke to him, he was working to find a house in Pakistan to temporarily lodge Afghans hoping to fight in Ukraine. The International Legion recently tightened the hiring standard and has been firing many volunteer soldiers, he said. But he'd recently gotten the good news that one Afghan soldier, Reza, had been accepted by the Ukrainians. Our conversations painted a picture of a man who had committed his life to the struggle for Ukraine, but whose own allies also viewed him with skepticism. I've had partners meeting with the Ministry of Defense every week and still have not been able to get them to agree to issue not one single visa for any of these soldiers, he complained. He'd pitched his idea widely, he said, but got yelled at by most everyone. When we spoke to him, he had transferred his frustration to the American government and had traveled to Washington to lobby. I'm in Washington, D.C. now to try to get some leadership here to help push the Ukrainians to take these soldiers, he said. It all hinges on the U.S. partners here encouraging Ukraine to use these men or us merely convincing them to use them. Again, that's over at Semaphore. They, again, seem to have a lot of inside track information on this guy. Ruth went on to say that he had some Capitol Hill contacts. Semaphore did an additional story. Alleged Trump gunman touted his Capitol Hill contacts. Ryan Ruth, charged on Monday following an apparent attempted assassination of Donald Trump, told Semaphore he blanketed congressional offices last year to enlist support for his plans to aid Ukraine, naming a pair of House members as particularly open to it. As part of D.C. outreach designed to boost his proposal for using foreign soldiers to help Ukraine's war effort against Russia, Ruth told Semaphore last year that he visited 200 House offices in one day and planned to visit 200 more. He also claimed to have visited all 100 Senate offices several days earlier. Ruth identified maybe 4 or 5 offices that were very, very receptive to his cause during his Hill visits, he told Semaphore then, naming Representatives Barry Moore, Republican from Alabama, and Seth Moulton, Democrat from Massachusetts. That small percentage of offices he described as helpful illustrates that long before his alleged targeting of Trump on the former president's West Palm Beach golf course on Sunday, Ruth was largely treated as a fringe figure in the halls of Congress. Moore has been very, very instrumental in giving us some information to get back to Ukraine to make them feel more comfortable, Ruth told Semaphore in March of 2023. He described Moore's office as assisting with background checks for Camp Lejeune, though it's not clear what component of his efforts that referred to. Ruth continued in the interview, there was a Mr. Moulton yesterday that's a veteran, that's a representative that was very adamant about not pulling out of Afghanistan. He was very, very receptive yesterday. Both Moore's and Moulton's offices said any interaction with Ruth was not meaningful, noting that he had talked to staff and not the respective lawmakers. A staffer in our office met with Ruth and referred him to the State Department to assist with his concerns, Madison Green, a spokesperson for Moore, told Semaphore. Congressman Moore never met with Ruth, and our office did not respond to any more of his inquiries. Mr. Ruth visited our Washington office without an appointment, Sidney Simon, spokesperson for Moulton, told Semaphore in a statement. Per office policy, walk-ins may speak with the relevant policy staffer if requested. Mr. Ruth spoke briefly with a staff member at the time, but it was quickly apparent that his views merited no further engagement. Ruth had no interactions with Congressman Moulton, nor did we respond to any further outreach, Simon added. One person familiar with Ruth's drop-in to the Moulton office characterized the alleged would-be assassin as kooky. Ruth told Semaphore last year that he visited the White House and the State Department as well, but was turned away in both places. Ruth made his first appearance in federal court in Florida to face a pair of federal gun charges related to his alleged attack on Trump. He is charged with possessing a firearm as a felon and possessing a firearm with an obliterated serial number per a federal criminal complaint. The New York Times reported on Sunday that he told the newspaper last year he was in D.C. to meet with the Helsinki Commission for 2 hours. That independent panel is asking with promoting democracy in former Soviet bloc countries, with members of the House and Senate serving as commissioners. A congressional aide told Semaphore that Helsinki Commission meetings are open to the public and that the panel had no record of meetings with Ruth at a staff or commissioner level. Again, it's over at Semaphore.com. The Daily Caller over at dailycaller.com had this clip. Joy Reid claims the violence is coming from MAGA when Trump was nearly assassinated twice. MSNBC host Joy Reid claimed Monday evening that supporters of former President Donald Trump were responsible for violence a day after an apparent second assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump. A Secret Service agent fired shots at Ryan Wesley Ruth, who was allegedly lurking near Trump International Golf Club while the former president was playing a round of golf Sunday, 2 months after Trump was shot and slightly wounded in the right ear while giving a speech at a July 13th campaign rally in Pennsylvania. Reid claimed that a series of events proved that the threat of violence came from Trump supporters. The irony of it is that the actual violence we're seeing comes much more disproportionately from MAGA themselves, whether it's January 6th, whether it's them threatening election workers, Reid told David Rothkopf, Whether it's the bomb threats coming into the schools in Springfield, the violence is coming from them, from their own supporters, yet they try to portray Haitian immigrants as the people to fear. Guests and hosts on MSLSD have been labeled Trump as a racist, a threat to democracy, a fascist, and even mentally unstable on the air multiple occasions. Reid referenced the discussion about the struggle and influx of at least 20,000 Haitian migrants into the city of Springfield, Ohio. Town residents interviewed by the Daily Caller said the migrants have contributed to an increase in traffic accidents and skyrocketing housing prices. The Daily Caller was unable to corroborate reports of the pets being stolen and eaten. Democrats criticized former President Donald Trump and Republican Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, claiming the Republican presidential ticket was spreading false stories about Haitian migrants. Trump mentioned the reports from residents during his Tuesday debate with Harris. Democrats claimed that the bomb threats were due to Republicans discussing the migrant influx, but Republican Governor Mike DeWine of Ohio said the bomb threats to Springfield schools were hoaxes from a foreign country during a Monday press conference, where he announced that state law enforcement officers would be conducting sweeps on a daily basis. Again, this is over at the Daily Caller, which is dailycaller.com. There's a link to the video there.
And boosting Trump back in 2016. But I also think there are Americans who are engaged in this kind of propaganda. And whether they should be civilly or even in some cases criminally charged is something that would be a better deterrence, because
I'm a proud shitholer. Well, let me give you one bottom line. As a former government official, government's going to kill this guy.
And the donor class can't just sit back on the sidelines and say, oh, well, don't worry, this will all work itself out. They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump. And that's a fact.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you.
He is not only unfit, he is destructive to our democracy, and he has to be eliminated.
He will get away with, he will imprison, he will execute whoever he's allowed to imprison, execute.
A lot of people have tried to draw similarities between Mussolini and Hitler. The difference, though, I think makes Donald Trump even more dangerous, because he has actually said out loud that it would be okay to terminate the Constitution to keep him in power.
well, Hitler was duly elected.
That's right.
Somebody with those tendencies, those dictatorial, authoritarian tendencies, would be like, oh, okay, we're going to shut this down. We're going to throw these people in jail.
Sounds like Nazism, if it walks like Nazism, if you're not exactly sure what you call it, if you don't call it fascism.
Donald Trump is going to consolidate power, politicize the rule of law, and break down democracy one day at a time.
The man means to throw people in jail who disagree with him, shut down legitimate press outlets, do what he can to literally undermine the rule of law and our country's values. I think it would be the end of our country as we know it.
The only thing that stood between him and the destruction of American democracy was the federal judiciary. No doubt about it.
Eric Shawn with more on the hearing underway as we speak in New York City on a plot to kill U.S. political leaders, with Donald Trump being a potential target. Eric.
Yeah, where you are, former President Trump, believed to be on the hit list of the alleged international assassin who is about to be arraigned here in federal court in Brooklyn. And authorities here believe that this suspect was sent here to potentially kill the former president, sent by Iran. The defendant is 46-year-old Asif Merchant. He is a Pakistani-born terror suspect who has a wife and kid in Iran. He is charged with trying to arrange the assassination of U.S. politicians or government officials right here on U.S. soil. Those officials have not been named in his indictment, but Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley has said that Trump, current President Biden, and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley were possible targets. He arrived in our country from Pakistan in April, then flew from Houston, Texas to New York City to meet with a confidential source and a pair of hitmen. Prosecutors say he paid those hitmen $5,000 to carry out his assassination plan. But those hitmen turned out to be FBI undercover agents. They say here he is at the meeting with the confidential source in a hotel room talking about the plot. It included staging a fake political protest to divert the Secret Service as the attempted killing of the U.S. official took place. Quote, Bertrand pointed to the target and repeatedly asked the CS to explain how the target would die. Bertrand told the CS that there would be security all around the person. You know, Iran for years now has threatened to kill the former president and other Trump administration officials, all in retaliation for Trump ordering the killing of top Iranian general and head of the Quds Force and the Revolutionary Guard, Qasem Soleimani, back in 2020. Bertrand's lawyer told us this morning that his client, when he enters a plea, will plead not guilty, but if he is eventually convicted, he could face life in prison. But that Iranian plot to kill President Trump and other top officials apparently is still very much on. Back to you.
Eric, thank you.
We're keeping an eye on Germany as it deindustrializes, and basically the engine of Europe seems to be stuttering and sputtering just a little bit. This story comes to us from the South China Morning Post. Germany lobbies fellow EU members to vote against tariffs on Chinese EVs. Efforts by Berlin come as China's Commerce Ministry is in Europe amid the trade dispute. Germany and China are actively working to convince European Union members to oppose electric vehicle tariffs during a vote next week, senior EU sources say. Berlin has been phoning other capitals in a late bid to get them to oppose the duties during a vote planned for September 25th. The development comes as Chinese Minister of Commerce Wang Wentao makes his way around Europe, discussing the high-profile trade dispute with senior figures in influential governments. Having spent the weekend in Italy, Wang will meet Robert Habeck, Germany's Minister for Economic Affairs, on Tuesday in Berlin, according to people familiar with the arrangements. He will sit down with car industry operators from Europe and China in a round table on Wednesday in Brussels, then meet EU trade chief in the Belgian capital on Thursday morning in an effort to stop the duties from coming into force. Germany is comfortably China's largest trading partner in Europe, and the fortunes of its powerful car sector have for decades influenced its policies towards the world's second largest economy. Its car makers are heavily invested in China and would also be subject to punitive tariffs of up to 35.3% when shipping electric vehicles made there back to Europe. The car lobby has campaigned against the duties, which the Commission says are necessary to counter the impact of subsidized Chinese models undercutting locally made rivals. Berlin also fears that German car companies could be the subject of Beijing's backlash if EU duties are finalized. On Monday, China's State Administration for Market Regulation warned companies including BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Volkswagen about antitrust risks, according to a report on the regulatory newswire MLEX, after complaints from China's domestic industry. While the European Commission is still confident it has enough votes to pass the measures into law, it is not the done deal that was presumed just weeks ago. 15 of 27 member states, accounting for 65% of the EU's population, would have to vote against tariffs to stop them, otherwise they will take effect for 5 years. In an indicative vote held in July, only 4 members voted against, with many abstaining. But as the vote nears, powerful capitals have come out against the countervailing duties, which were the result of a lengthy investigation that found undeclared subsidies at every stage of China's electric vehicle supply chain. Last week, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez implied that Madrid would flip from a vote in favor of duties to a vote against. This came after Beijing launched an anti-dumping probe into EU pork imports, a large share of which come from Spain. At the same time, Sanchez was promised large-scale industrial investment during a meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Among them, the Chinese hydrogen electrolyzer manufacturer Envision would build a $1 billion, that's in US dollars, plant in Spain. I have to be blunt and frank with you that we need to reconsider, all of us, not only member states but also the European Commission, Sanchez said during a visit to Kunshan in eastern China. We don't need another war, in this case a trade war, Sanchez said when asked how Spain planned to vote. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz expressed support for Sanchez's position, saying via his spokesman Stefan Heberstreit that this direction of travel is one that we share. Germany abstained in July's vote after its divided coalition government could not land on a common position. But Scholz's stance has led to increased lobbying that has been called unhelpful by Brussels sources. It's a high-stakes gambit from Scholz, whose government has split on whether to take a firmer stance against what Brussels describes as market-distorting behavior in China's industrial powerhouse. Success from Berlin's perspective would undermine European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's de-risking efforts during her second term, even before she puts her senior leadership team together. Von der Leyen, a German, is set to introduce her proposed College of Commissioners on Tuesday. She's vowed to strengthen her trade defenses against China, arguing that the bloc needs to decrease critical dependencies and bolster its own industrial competition. If Scholz is successful in stopping the duties, it may offer some short-term relief for German car makers who won't have to worry about Chinese retaliation, said Noah Barkin, an analyst of EU-China relations at Rhodium Group. But the scars for Europe in terms of damage to the Franco-German relationship, to the bloc's leverage with China, and to its credibility with G7 allies would be deep and long-lasting, he added, referring to Paris's long-standing support for the measures. In the meantime, Beijing has been making its own efforts to tip the balance in its favor. On Sunday, Wang met Robert Vavasori, chair of the Italian Association of the Automotive Industry, to discuss the EU's anti-subsidy case against China's electric vehicles, according to a statement on the ministry's website. If Italy were to follow Spain and potentially Germany in voting against the tariffs, Brussels will have a scrap on its hands, since several big states flipping could give smaller countries cover to follow suit. Over the weekend, meanwhile, a Chinese industrial group said it had coordinated with car companies to offer a new proposal to the Commission, which would make fresh commitments around a price floor for the imports, which the Commission says are undercutting local competitors. China Chamber of Commerce of Machinery and Electrical Equipment has coordinated companies to submit a perfect priced commitment plan to the European Commission, which further considered its concerns, read a post on the Chamber's WeChat account. The deadline for submitting such offers was the 24th of August. There's no possibility beyond that deadline to offer new price undertakings under the rules for this type of investigation, EU trade spokesman Olaf Gill said, adding that the Chinese automakers in question have had many weeks before the deadline to make the offer. He said the previous proposals had been received on the very last day of the period in which such an undertaking was possible. Had it happened at an earlier stage, that would have allowed for meaningful engagement on this topic, Gill said. However, the fact of the matter is that all offers received, all of them were received on the very final day of the deadline itself. All the Commission could do was thoroughly review them. Insiders say that Beijing may be trying to pressure the Commission by making offers that are not legally acceptable under EU trade rules. Several capitals have voiced their hope of a negotiated solution, and that the optics of Brussels rejecting a series of proposals from the Chinese side may seem as though it's being unreasonable. Various sources plot against them. Again, that's over at the South China Morning Post. Reuters posted this entry: China's carrot and stick with EU trading partners starting to pay off. Beijing, as a vote on EU duties on China-made electric vehicles looms, employed a carrot and stick approach to deal with the 27-strong bloc, threatening trade retaliation while cajoling key EU states into one-on-one talks on deals and investments. The potential blow of counter tariffs on EU goods will fall mostly on states such as Spain, France, and Italy that have voiced support for the EV duties, with pork, dairy, and brandy exports to the world's second biggest economy at stake. European Union members such as Germany, Finland, and Sweden that have not pushed for the tariffs would feel less impact with little exposure to the export items singled out by China. China's tactics appear to be working. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez wrapped up a China visit this week by sitting in a Chinese EV and saying it was an honor. He then unexpectedly urged the EU to reconsider its position. According to a Spanish government source, Sanchez's delegation came away feeling Spain is more important now, and that an agreement over tariffs on its pork products was close. As a sweetener, a Chinese company agreed to build a billion-dollar plant in Spain to make machinery used for hydrogen production in an apparent backing for Spain's green ambitions. With pork and dairy, China maximizes the domestic political cost to the countries voting to impose EV tariffs, said Beijing-based economist Mei Xingyu, with the agricultural sector often playing a role in EU politics. These products count on China as their top export markets, he said. Pork, dairy, and brandy exports from the EU to China totaled about $10 billion in 2023, although not all products in those categories would be subject to tariffs. The bloc's exports to China last year totaled over $280 billion. China has opened an anti-dumping probe into imports of pork and brandy from the EU, as well as anti-subsidy investigations into dairy imports from the bloc. Still feeling the pinch of U.S. tariffs imposed during the Trump era, China does not want a trade war with the EU, but Beijing has made it clear it would fight if Brussels imposes additional EV tariffs of up to 35.3%. China-made EVs exported to Europe rose 38% in 2023 to 656,000 units, including shipments non-EU countries. Europe accounted for more than 40% of EVs shipped out of China last year, according to Reuters calculations based on data from the China Passenger Car Association. Chinese Commerce Minister Wang Wentao will visit Europe next week and hold talks with EU Trade Chief Valdis Dombrovskis. Wang will also visit Italy, which supports the EV tariffs while seeking Chinese investment to build EV production capacity. There's a couple of charts here worth having a look at. The bar up there shows 4 top commodities by values imported by China from major EU nations such as Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and Netherlands in the year 2023. China needs at least 15 EU members, representing 65% of the EU population, to oppose the tariffs at a vote in October. But positions within the EU remain diverse. Some smaller states are keeping their heads down. Others are prioritizing ties closer to home. Ireland's exports to China are only a small fraction of its exports, so Ireland will prioritize the EU market and relationship over China, said an Irish trade representative in China, speaking on condition of anonymity. China is still important, but business with China is hard and not growing as well as expected. Ireland is the 5th most exposed EU producer in China's dairy investigation and 6th worst off in its pork probe. In contrast, China appears to allow no room for negotiations or concessions with Canada, hitting it on Monday with a probe into its rapeseed exports after Ottawa introduced a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs in August, accusing Beijing of unfair competition. Unlike with Brussels, Beijing gave Ottawa no public prior warning of how it might hit back, signals often conveyed in Chinese state media such as Global Times. He Yangguan, a Chinese Commerce Ministry spokesperson, said evidence shows Canada's rapeseed exports to China had been dumped and had damaged domestic industry when asked to explain the difference in approach. Canadian rapeseed producers play by a rules-based global trading order, a spokesperson for Global Affairs Canada told Reuters. We are following this closely, said the spokesperson. On the contrary, Beijing has clearly been open to negotiation with the EU, said Yvonne Pei, an analyst at Beijing-based Trivium China, who specializes in agriculture. With Canada, they went straight for shock and awe, Pei said. There's more here to click through to, some good graphs and bars. just have a look over at Reuters.com. I'll leave the link to this and all the stories I cover here on Atomic Biscuits out on my account at Gab under BACFA. Those of you who've been around and listened to me for a long time, or have been part of the Truther movement, or whatever you want to call us, will remember this particular story, and it, I think, needs to be refreshed before we go to the next story, just for context. This goes back to April 13th, 2021. It's from The Intercept. There are a lot of different outlets that reported on this, but it is used as kind of a classic example of how low-level hacking can do great damage. You've probably heard of Israel using malware on a phone to turn on GPS coordinates where they can drop a bomb on somebody. They did that with some reporters that weren't being very friendly, right? I mean, they've done some crazy stuff. Well, this goes back to 2021. It says Israel may have destroyed Iranian centrifuges simply by cutting power. The explosion and blackout at the Natanz nuclear facility in Iran over the weekend raised the specter of past sabotage, including the Stuxnet cyber attack that took out some of Natanz's centrifuges between 2007 and 2010, as well as an explosion and fire that occurred there last July, destroying about 3/4 of a newly opened plant for the assembly of centrifuges. Now, I won't read this whole thing, but basically, they made the centrifuges, which were being used to improve the quality of nuclear material so that it could be used not for peaceful purposes. They made these centrifuges overspin and burn themselves up and kind of explode, which destroyed the samples and set Iran back. Okay, I'll leave this link out with all the others, but I wanted you to be aware that this kind of low-level hackery is something that Israel employs quite a bit. It's not just about using artificial intelligence to lock on to Hamas targets in the Gaza Strip, which may or may not be accurate, and blow them up and count them as a win from a distance. This seems to be a new protocol for the Israelis to use distance kills. Now, before we go on to the next story, I want to ask you, where is your phone right now? Do you have a phone? Do you have a phone on you? Does it have a lithium battery in it? Is it in your pocket? Is it in your shirt pocket next to your heart? Is it next to your ear? Where is it right now? And imagine it exploding with such force that it could take off your hands and fingers. That's what happened this week in what is being called a 9/11 style attack. I think that seems to be the new gold standard in attacks, right? October attacks on Israel were Israel's 9/11. This stuff is not getting less, it's getting more and more frequent. This story comes to us from ArsTechnica.com. 8 dead, 2,700 injured after simultaneous pager explosions in Lebanon. Lithium-ion batteries or supply chain attack may be to blame. Leave a little bit of wiggle room here, but I think all the early indications are this is an Israeli attack one way or the other. A massive wave of pager explosions across Lebanon and Syria around 3:30 p.m. local time today has killed at least 8 people and injured more than 2,700. And this is dated 9/17, just for context. Many of the injured appeared to be Hezbollah members, although a young girl is said to be among the dead. Well, I suppose if a man was carrying a pager on his belt line at his hip and a child was adjacent, that would make sense that it would maybe kill someone else. New York Times reporters captured the chaos of the striking scene in 2 anecdotes. Ahmed Ayoud, a butcher from the Boston neighborhood in Beirut, said he was in his shop when he heard explosions. Then he saw a man in his 20s fall off a motorbike. He appeared to be bleeding. We all thought he got wounded from random shooting, Ayoud said. Then a few minutes later, we started hearing of other cases. All were carrying pagers. Residents of Beirut's southern suburbs, where many of the explosions took place, reported seeing smoke coming from people's pockets, followed by a blast like a firework. Mohammed Awada, 52, was driving alongside one of the victims. My son went crazy and started to scream when he saw the man's hand flying away from him, he said. Video from the region already shows a device exploding in the supermarket checkout line, and pictures show numerous young men lying on the ground with large bloody wounds on their upper legs and thighs. The shocking and novel attack appears to have relied on a wave of recently imported Hezbollah pagers, according to reporting in the Wall Street Journal. The group has already warned its members to avoid using cell phones due to both tracking and assassination concerns. According to the Wall Street Journal, a Hezbollah official speculated that malware may have caused the devices to explode. The official said some people felt the pagers heat up and disposed of them before they burst. The pagers in question allegedly have lithium-ion batteries, which sometimes explode after generating significant heat. The coordinated nature of the attack suggests that some kind of firmware hack or supply chain attack may have given an adversary the ability to trigger a pager explosion at the time of its choosing. Hezbollah officials are already blaming, privately, Israel, which has not taken responsibility, but has been able to perform surprising electronic strikes on its enemies, including the Stuxnet malware that damaged Iran's nuclear program. The Associated Press noted that even Iran's ambassador to Lebanon was injured in the widespread attack. Some further updates here. The Times adds a small detail. The devices were programmed to beep for several seconds before exploding, according to officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity because of the sensitivity of the matter. Several of the explosions were captured on video, and in them the devices appeared to explode more in the manner of a small grenade, a bang and a puff of smoke, than a lithium-ion battery, which may explode but is often followed by continuing smoke and fire. Despite some of the early speculation by Hezbollah officials, this is a breaking story and the cause of the explosions still remains unclear. About 10 minutes later, they updated the story again. The Wall Street Journal quotes regional security analyst Michael Horowitz as suggesting the attack was likely caused by either 1, malware triggering the batteries to overheat and explode, or 2, an actual explosive charge inserted in the devices at some point in the supply chain and then detonated remotely. Either way, this is a very sophisticated attack, Horowitz told the Wall Street Journal, particularly if this is a physical breach, as this would mean Israel has access to the producer of those devices. This may be part of the message being sent here. Update about 15 minutes later. Reuters notes that Israel has claimed to foil a Hezbollah assassination plot that would have used remotely detonated explosives. Earlier on Tuesday, Israel's domestic security agency said it had foiled a plot by Lebanese militant group Hezbollah to assassinate a former senior defense official in the coming days. The Shin Bet agency, which did not name the official, said in a statement it had seized an explosive device attached to a remote detonation system using a mobile phone and a camera that Hezbollah had planned to operate from Lebanon. Then there's an update 40 minutes later. In today's U.S. State Department briefing, which you can watch here, and there's a link, spokesperson Matthew Miller was asked about the pager attacks. The U.S. was not involved in it, he said. The U.S. was not aware of this incident in advance. He said the U.S. government is currently gathering more information on what happened. Then, about an hour and a half later at 3:30 p.m., a former British Army expert speculates about the cause of the explosions, telling the BBC that the devices would have likely been packed with between 10 to 20 grams each of military-grade high explosive, hidden inside a fake electronic compartment. This, said the expert, would have been armed by a signal, something called an alphanumeric text message. Once armed, the next person to use the device would have triggered the explosive. A lot of speculation there. I want to remind listeners that there is a widespread belief that those who are being controlled in the halls of American Congress are somehow booby-trapped, that they can be killed from a distance. And it's not just a heart attack gun idea. It's something that gets installed in them when they're maybe already under anesthesia. Maybe they're getting their tonsils out, or they're getting their teeth cleaned, or whatever it is, and they wake up with something lodged inside their body without them knowing it first, that can be detonated. Something that won't be a surprise to the medical examiner who will be examining the body of an official, but would not be listed as the cause of death. And that once these people realize they're walking around with a ticking time bomb inside them, they'll do just about anything they're told to do. So then it makes you ask, well, who would do such a thing? Well, we don't have to go very far to find out that there is a league of people installed in the halls of Congress who have an assignment for each member of Congress. They have an assigned individual who will help them make decisions. Just food for thought, not making any accusations, and I'm not making any characterizations. And I meant to point out too, in that story, one of the things that they didn't get in the law was the ability to remote access devices. Interesting that would come up in that article in the context of the pager explosions too. Over at thegatewaypundit.com, Macron's impeachment being considered in French National Assembly. Former Rothschild banker and globalist poster boy, French President Emmanuel Macron, will have to once again demonstrate his mastery of the art of political survival as impeachment proceedings against him are in motion in the French National Assembly. Macron called snap elections to preclude a victory by Marine Le Pen's right-wing RN party, made an alliance with the hard left against them, and proceeded to betray the left, who has the most seats in parliament, and rejected their prime minister candidate in favor of one of his own, Michel Barnier, one that is much more conservative than his previous pick, Gabriel Attal. The hard left parties naturally went ballistic and presented a motion for Macron's impeachment. While it's very unlikely that he will end up removed from power, the effort did clear the first hurdle in the process. Le Monde reported, the radical left, La France Insoumise, LFI party, effort to remove Emmanuel Macron from office passed a first crucial step on Tuesday, September 17th. The Bureau of the Assemblée Nationale, the institution's top decision-making body, validated the admissibility of the procedure initiated by LFI, with the support of the Greens, the Communists, and even the Socialists. The left-wing coalition Nouveau Front Populaire, NFP, holds a majority of the Bureau of the Assembly. This new majority has emboldened LFI, which on August 17th threatened Macron with impeachment if he did not appoint Lucie Castet, the NFP candidate for prime minister. After Macron decided not to name Castet, LFI put their money where their mouth was and submitted their text. Gabriel Attal, former prime minister and president of Macron's group of MPs in the Assemblée Nationale, said during the Bureau's meeting that this motion and this debate are a declaration of war on French institutions and called its authors agents of permanent destabilization. Assembly President Yael Braun-Pivet criticized the left-wing majority on the Assemblée Nationale's Bureau for approving Macron's impeachment proceedings, stating they have chosen to misuse the rule of law. She added, our rules are meant to be respected. The decision by some to exploit them for purely political purposes is causing serious damage to our institutions, she wrote in a press release. The move, the first of its kind in the history of the Fifth Republic, is expected to have no realistic chance of succeeding. Euractiv reported, the procedure was launched to denounce Macron's unprecedented authoritarian drift in the world of parliamentary regimes and in the system of representative democracy. A petition signed by over 300,000 people states, Over the summer, the President of the Republic refused to allow NFP candidate Lucie Castet to form a government despite NFP winning the most seats in July's legislative elections. Veteran right-winger Michel Barnier was eventually appointed Prime Minister earlier this month. The impeachment effort now heads to be examined by Assembly's Law Committee before being put to the vote in wider Parliament. To be adopted, the text must be approved by 2/3 of MPs, 385 out of 577. If the resolution passes the Assembly hurdle, it must then be sent to the Senate, where right-wing parties and their centrist allies have a majority. It seemed like a good idea to cover this story as well, since it seems to link a little bit to some of the other stories. This is from theregister.com out of the UK. Predator spyware kingpins added to U.S. sanctions list. Designations come as new infrastructure spins up in Africa. 5 individuals and 1 company with ties to spyware developer Intellexa are the latest to earn sanctions as the U.S. expands efforts to stamp out spyware. The latest sanctions from the Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, follow initial action taken in July 2023 when Intellexa itself was added to the list after being deemed a potential threat to national security. Intellexa is on the naughty list for developing the Predator spyware, similar to NSO Group's Pegasus, which arguably carries a little more notoriety. Yet Intellexa also has all the features you definitely don't want running on any of your devices. Phone calls, messages, GPS data, and microphone and camera access, among others, are all believed to be compromised if the software, which can run silently on iOS and Android, worms its way onto a device. After going a little quiet earlier this year, researchers recently spotted evidence of new Predator infrastructure popping up in African countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo and Angola, suggesting Intellexa was hardly bothered by its initial OFAC sanctioning. Insect Group, Recorded Futures threat Intel Arm, identified various other potential customers of Predator software, spyware, in March. These included Armenia, Botswana, Egypt, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Oman, the Philippines, Saudi Arabia, and Trinidad and Tobago. Included among the 5 individuals to be sanctioned, its Greek businessman Felix Bitzios, majority shareholder at Intellexa. Bitzios has also acted as a manager of the company, as his senior executive Mirom Harpaz, who was sanctioned alongside him. Andrea Nicola Constantino Hermes Gambazi, the Swiss-born Emirates-based owner of Intellexa's parent company, Thalestris Limited, which also has distribution rights for Predator and is already designated by the OFAC, joins Bitzios. Panagiotta Carioli is a director of multiple Thalestris subsidiaries, the OFAC said, which is why the Cypriot has now also earned a spot on the list. Artemis Artemou is the latest individual to be added to this round of sanctions. Artemou is described as the general manager and board member at Citrox Holdings, the Hungary-based company responsible for developing earlier versions of Predator before production moved to Citrox AD, located in North Macedonia. The company is part of the Intellexa consortium and was first designated in 2023 for trafficking vulnerability exploits. Finally, Aliada Group is based in the British Virgin Islands and is described as an enabler of transactions for Intellexa valued at tens of millions of dollars. It's currently directed by Tal Jonathan Dillian, who founded the Intellexa Consortium, the OFAC said. The United States will not tolerate the reckless propagation of disruptive technologies that threaten our national security and undermine the privacy and civil liberties of our citizens, said Bradley T. Smith, acting Undersecretary of the Treasury for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence. We will continue to hold accountable those that seek to enable the proliferation of exploitive technologies, while also encouraging the responsible development of technologies that align with international standards. As the Register previously reported, the commercial spyware market is worth big bucks, approximately $12 billion a year, and according to experts, appears to be booming. Purchase prices of kit, such as Predator and Pegasus, don't come cheap since they're preloaded with exploit chains that harness various zero-day vulnerabilities. Valuable stuff for anyone operating on either side of the cybersecurity game. Amnesty International's Security Lab republished a leaked price proposal for Predator in 2022 after it was leaked on the XSS Cybercrime Forum. The proposal was for a package deal including both Predator and Nova, Intellex's data analysis system. The price was set at 8 million euros, which is about $8.9 million at today's exchange rate. Considering the dirt such software could unearth on targets of interest, it's easy to see why some states can justify the expenditure. Targets typically include government figures, journalists, and human rights activists, but this could feasibly be extended to wider and less specific pools of people in civil society, too. In other news, Apple has reportedly abandoned its plan to sue Israeli Pegasus peddler NSO Group. The iGiant announced its intention to impose costs on the spyware maker in 2021, but recently cited concerns that proceeding with litigation might expose sensitive details that could harm the cybersecurity community if revealed in open court. State-sponsored actors like the NSO Group spend millions of dollars on sophisticated surveillance technologies without effective accountability. That needs to change, said Craig Federighi, Apple's Senior Vice President of Software Engineering, in 2021. Apple devices are the most secure consumer hardware on the market, but private companies developing state-sponsored spyware have become even more dangerous. While these cybersecurity threats only impact the very small number of our customers, we take any attack on our users very seriously, and we're constantly working to strengthen the security and privacy protections in iOS to keep all our users safe. Pegasus spyware used what's referred to as the forced entry exploit to break into iOS and install itself on targeted devices. The exploit, which involved specially crafted iMessage messages, required no interaction from the victim, 0 click, for it to be carried out. NSO Group unsuccessfully attempted to get Apple's case thrown out earlier this year, but now had its wish granted by Apple itself, the Washington Post reported on Friday. Apple maintains its claims are still valid, but now feels that by going to trial, critical threat intelligence would come to light that may lead the growing commercial spyware ecosystem to develop workarounds for Apple's anti-spyware protections. Which to me smells like we paid them off so that we could keep our secrets to ourselves, and we're not permitted to complain about who launched this against us or against the people who carry our devices. It's fascinating, the pattern that emerges once you see it. I've got a bunch of bonus stories on the links today that I just did not have time to cover, but I did want to hit this one really quickly before we go. MoneyMetals.com has Nassim Taleb. People aren't seeing the real de-dollarization. It's not a black swan event. In fact, it's playing out right before our eyes and was entirely predictable. The world is slowly but surely spurning the dollar, but most people haven't noticed. De-dollarization might seem like a wild conspiracy theory, but it is happening. Countries worldwide are trying to limit their exposure to the greenback, and the dollar's clout is slowly ebbing. No, the dollar isn't on the verge of collapse due to a major trauma. It's more like death by a million paper cuts. Nassim Taleb, best known for his book The Black Swan, said in a post on X that people are not seeing the real de-dollarization in progress. He pointed out that global transactions are still generally labeled in dollars as an anchor currency. In other words, the dollar still serves as the primary medium of exchange, but more and more countries are turning to gold as a store of value. As author Richard Turin put it, the U.S. will tout the USD's high percentage use in trade all the way to the bottom. Turin pointed out that the dollar's high percentage in trade settlements is increasingly meaningless for two reasons. One, gold holdings show reserve storage. Two, migration of trade to alternate currencies isn't captured on SWIFT statistics. This trend toward storing wealth in gold instead of dollars makes sense given the U.S. government's persistent evaluation of its currency that seems to be accelerating. Luke Groman, founder and president of Forest for the trees confirmed Tlaib's point with a graph noting that this de-dollarization trend has been in play for more than a decade and got much louder post-2022 sanctioning of Russian FX reserves. In fact, dollar reserves globally have dropped by 14% since 2002, and as the graph shows, de-dollarization accelerated after the U.S. and her Western allies aggressively sanctioned Russia and froze the country's assets after it invaded Ukraine. Geopolitical and financial analyst Angelo Giuliano posted the same graph asserting de-dollarization is happening. He noted that the gold hit yet another all-time high on September 12th, saying this is only the beginning. All these experts confirm the United States' weaponization of the dollar is undermining its strength and role as a reserve currency. A recent Atlantic Council report on the failing percentage of dollar reserves pointed out dollar weaponization was a factor behind this trend. The U.S. and its allies not only froze Russian assets, but they also locked the country out of the SWIFT financial system. The Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications, SWIFT, system serves as the global economy's superhighway. In effect, it operates as a global financial messaging service facilitating cross-border payments since the dollar serves as the world reserve currency. SWIFT effectively facilitates an international dollar system. This gives the U.S. a great deal of leverage, as the Russians discovered. This wasn't the first time the U.S. used SWIFT and the dollar as a stick to advance its foreign policy goals. In 2014, the Obama administration locked several Russian financial institutions out of SWIFT as relations between the two countries deteriorated over Ukraine and Crimea. A few years later, the Trump administration threatened China in an attempt to force that country to join in sanctioning North Korea. Whether you think the sanctions were justified or not, it's important to remember that other countries are watching. They realize that dependence on dollars makes them vulnerable too. U.S. manipulation, and this is one of the many reasons countries are trying to diversify away from the USD. Think about it. If you're concerned that the U.S. could pull the dollar rug out from under you, why not pull out the dollar system first? This appears to be what's slowly happening. Again, it's a death by a million paper cuts. According to a 2023 Invesco survey, a substantial percentage of central banks expressed concern about how the U.S. and its allies froze nearly half of Russia's $650 billion of gold and forex reserves. Anyway, it goes on to talk about the central banks turning to gold. I think we know a little bit more than what we're seeing here. This is kind of after the fact, trying to get you to go to hard metals. The thing is, what's replacing SWIFT? What blockchain are they moving to? Who is the International Bank of Settlements going to use? If you're listening to RIA, you already know this from weeks ago. I would encourage you to go back and listen to Sunday Long Live Radio in the first hour over the last couple of weeks. While they are discussing this topic, I think it gives us some good guidance about where our value should be to ride out the currency storm. Well, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Atomic Biscuits. That's all the time we have for this week. I want to encourage you to think about where your value is stored. Is it in treasures on earth, or is it in something in the beyond? Have fun with life and make sure that you don't get too caught up in the buzz mess that is this season that we are approaching. It's a holiday season. Remember, the weather is cooling here in the Northern Hemisphere. Let's enjoy our families and our time together. And until next week from beautiful North Georgia, this is BACFA. Have a good one.
Thanks for joining us for Atomic Biscuits. Tune in again next week for more news and music. Check out BACFA on Gab at BACFA, as well as BitChute, Rumble, D-Live and Odyssey. Check out LastScoutRadio.com for fun content. Listen to WBN 324 on radio stations around the world, on many streaming platforms, and World Broadcasting Network WBN 324.zil.